just mentioned something very important. The Haitian population, that especially the Haitian population that speaks Creole, it doesn't get talked about enough. I thought you did a marvelous job the other day addressing the fact that there are people who, while they may speak English, would probably feel very comfortable knowing that their representative does speak their language. I don't know if there are other candidates in the race who do, but I think the fact that you immediately distinguish yourself as somebody who can communicate with people in the communities that feel like they are not represented. If you could talk about that, the importance of doing that, because obviously we know that a lot of Latino representation is very helpful if you can speak that language. So I'm curious if that is something that you've experienced as well, being able to directly communicate with people in communities that English may not be their first language.
Definitely. We see the difference because there's a saying in Creole where it's speak Creole, understand Creole, kind of like we're one people because we can understand the language. That's something that we don't have a lot of, especially when it comes to getting licensing. If you are a Haitian doctor, you come here, you have to take the exam in Creole, in English. But if you're a Hispanic doctor, you can take it in Spanish. So we see when it comes to licensing, there is a part of it that's discriminatory because now how do you have to learn the language? You can't even practice in your profession. So it's important that we have someone who can articulate those needs to get over that hurdle. But there's a lot of things in our language that is different than in English when you start to explain democracy, and that has to be done. But one of the biggest things I feel the Haitian community is missing is actually representation in Congress. At this moment, we have no Haitian representatives in Congress, and Haitians are one of the largest groups in the United States. And we have none. We've never had a Democratic representative in Congress. We only had one Republican. And the impact of that is that right now in Haiti, we have a lot of issues. We have issues with TPS extensions. We have issues with even the government in Haiti, and no one's speaking on it. We see with people like Marco Rubio, who's in the Senate. When you have someone there, they become the voice of that area. So if there's any issues that are going on in Latin America, they turn to him. Right now, there's no one to turn to. So we have a huge population that's not being represented. No one's speaking up for the population, but everyone's saying, I want your vote. Everyone's saying that I'm friends with the Haitian community. Well, if that was the case, why is it that Haitian doctors and lawyers, when they come here, they must take it in English, and other countries have a different privilege? So at that point, we have to realize that it's important that we have a voice. Without a voice, we're just eating alive on the table. So that's what we're here to do, is to change that.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's no doubt that the Haitian community and Haitian immigrants have always been disproportionately, unfairly, and justly treated here. And I remember as a little kid, the immigration policy, which is still the thing. I mean, it was, right. If you were Cuban, we'd roll out the red carpet. But if you were Haitian, we would, stick you on a raft and send you back. And I always found that abhorrent. And so to hear that there's also this disparity in testing is not remotely surprising to me. I was pleased that and I certainly know that we have election documents do come in Creole. I know that our ballots and our voting does come in Creole, but I never thought about licensing, and that just sucks. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was my thought.
Oh, it was a good one.
That was my thought.
But I also do believe that, not just representing the Haitian community, but representing a substantial community of color and knowing the issues that exist when it comes to some of the basic necessities that I think a lot of people take for granted, especially when it comes to fair housing. I'm actually reading up on that as we speak, and knowing that there are a lot of tricks. I always say, I'm not really concerned about the crazy yahoos that wave the Confederate flag. I'm concerned about the people who sign on the dotted line and make the decisions. I think that systemic racism is something that people can't necessarily see, but they know is there. And I'm curious as to what your experience has been like with that and how you see your representation of this district helping change that narrative that's been going on for a long time.
Well, I think it's willful blindness, right? They know what's going on. They see it going on. A lot of people prefer to turn a blind eye just because it's easier. And that's when you need a voice that's always pushing to say, no, let's look at the root problem. What is blocking us from being successful? What is blocking us from accessing jobs? What is blocking us from accessing housing or good credit? We have to dig deep and understand what's really blocking us. And it is the foundation of the United States, to be honest with you. When we look at what happened during segregation, they intentionally kept this out. Those rules are still there. And if you ask questions like, why is this still on the books? No one can give you a good answer. That's how it's always been. That should be a red flag. If that's how it's always been, where did that derive from? Because we have a country that was full of racism and slavery. So if we have it there just because it's been there, we have to turn back the time and look at it and say, why are we doing this? And it's only when we're not afraid to confront the past and be honest about where we've been, then we can start cultivating a new system going forward. The culture of colored people in this country has always been one that I think is shared. It's a shared experience between immigrants of color and Americans here. And the reason I say that is because when I enter a room, no one says, oh, she's Haitian American. When I enter a room, they say that is a Black woman. And I hear that every single day. So the things that I'm facing, the things that I'm overcoming, it's in the same light. And I think that us coming together unified, not just people of color, not just people who are affected by it, but everyone, and how we're talking about it on this show, actually shows a unified force going forward, where our generation is saying no more. And I think that was a great thing about the movement that happened after George Floyd died. It was ageless, colorless, sexist. It was just everybody came together and said, enough is enough. And we started seeing change. So when it comes to institutionalized racism, we have to take the same approach. Everyone has a duty to speak up. Everyone has a duty to educate. And everyone has a duty to correct.
Yeah. So in the vein of education, I recently read a book called The Whiteness of Wealth. And I don't know if you've heard of this book or not. It's fairly recent, and it was really fascinating. And it was really about all the different financial ways that our system is set up to benefit white people and white families. And it's things I never thought of before. And, you know, I'm not completely oblivious and unaware of race issues, but like it never occurred to me that they were in the tax code. It never occurred to me, you know, and so I highly recommend everyone check out this book. It's called The Whiteness of Wealth. I did reach out to her and ask her to come on, and she's like, I really don't have time. So whatever. But it's a great book, and it talks about housing, education, employment, taxing, all the investing, and all these different things, and how they've been closed off to communities of color, and how that has made us be where we are now in terms of no generational wealth in those communities. And so it's very deep. And I don't think people understand that. And I never even thought of it in terms of the tax code. And yet, sure enough, there is this very white supremacist basis of a bunch of our tax rules.
Well, let's look at how they rolled out relief for COVID. When they said everybody has to work from home, if first responders had to go to work, where were the provisions inside of our state or all over the country to protect the class that had to go to work and their kids had to stay home? Where was the equal access for Wi-Fi capabilities? These are things that they started addressing afterwards. But that put people of color at a disadvantage, right? Because you have to work those jobs, you have to leave your kids at home, and there's no Wi-Fi.
Right.
And even when they rolled out for small businesses, there's been a history when banks have control over funds and they have no real parameters and they have their own discretion. They give to who they call preferential clients, and the preferential clients don't look like me, gender not like you either. That we're not preferred.
Right.
And so when it came to rolling out the PPP, we didn't get it first. We weren't preferred. We had a long process. It wasn't until the second time when they said, oh, let's correct it. I don't believe that was a real oversight, to be quite honest with you, because we just came from the whole housing crisis and we saw how the banks handled that bailout, right? So why is it oversight now until after all the rich big companies got their money? And now let's correct? We can't be blind to these situations.
Right. And I think it's people expect to see something that's blatant. So like, for example, you'd expect to see, oh, Black people pay more taxes because they're Black. No, that's not how it works. How it works is, and this was fascinating to me. So let's say two households, and the white household has $100,000 income by one earner and the wife stays home. Now, let's say the other household is $100,000, but it's 50-50 and it's a Black household, which you have more likely odds that the women are going to work and be equal in terms of salary. That's just how it works. So that household is paying more on their $100,000 in taxes than the household with the single provider is paying on his $100,000 in taxes. And those kinds of rules that are set up to benefit more of white family, societal, structural things, and don't take into consideration other things, the end result is going to be disproportionately affecting Black people. Like that, it's not blatant, but but I see it so clearly now, and it's just, I would urge people to try to see those things.
Speaking of very important topic.
The pay gap. Yeah. It's massive, and it's not based on specifically saying skin color, but it's set up in a way that it penalizes people, especially people who are already paying for another thing. Black families are more likely to be helping to pay for older generations. And so because those generations weren't given their opportunity as well. So it's just not an equal scenario any way you look at it. So when you make policies based on certain lifestyles that only apply to one privileged group of people, it's going to inherently penalize the other people. Thanks for watching. If you want to support our mission to transform politics into service, please like this video, subscribe, follow us on social media, and consider joining our Patreon, where you'll get early access to our interviews as well as other exclusive content. Links are in the description. Peace out.